All right. Hello, everybody. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us for our weekly lecture, which usually takes place at America House. So, of course, we are online today, but with America House's support. My name is Nellie, and I am an Education USA advisor, specifically the outreach coordinator. And I am joining you today from Michigan. I am back in the US, but thank you so much for joining us in your evening there in Ukraine. So today our topic is about admissions interviews for American universities, colleges and universities. And we'll talk about, a couple different types of interviews, which includes interviews for exchange programs, American exchange programs, as well as interviews directly with American universities. So I hope this will be interesting, useful for you. I am also very lucky to be joined today by two of my colleagues who have experience with interviews with universities and exchange programs. Maria, who is our Education USA ambassador in Cherkasy, and Anastasia, who was our ambassador in Vinnytsia. So the format of the webinar today will be a short presentation from me. Then I will give my colleagues a couple minutes to speak about their own experiences, and then we will ask for questions. So we hope that you will submit your questions into the comment section, the chat box on YouTube, and we will answer those at the end. So you can speak with two wonderful alumni who have firsthand experience. So without further ado, let's get started. So for those of you who are maybe joining us for the first time and don't know what Education USA is, we are an official network of the U.S. State Department. We work all around the world in more than 180 countries, and we really serve as the official source of information about higher education in the U.S. So our job is to give interested students official, up-to-date, unbiased information about studying in the U.S. So we do not promote certain universities in the U.S. We work with all accredited colleges and universities, more than 4,000 of them, to really help you find what will be the best option for you. And because we are an official network of the State Department, everything that we do is free. So all of our events, lectures, resources, we do one-on-one consultations as well. All of that is free. So our main advising center is located in Kyiv, as maybe you have guessed, near the metro station Platsportu. Of course, our office is closed right now, but once things open back up, you're welcome to come to our library, use resources, study for the GRE or TOEFL or whatever, and use our resources. We also are partnered with Window on America centers, which you can see on the map here with the little red markers. Those are in every Oblast center around Ukraine. And they also have resources related to preparing for tests for U.S. admissions, for picking a major, for picking a career, for choosing a university. So there are lots of great, again, free resources there. And these little stars are where our Education USA ambassadors are. So our ambassadors are all alumni of U.S. government exchange programs or have experience studying in the U.S. And they have been trained on Education USA topics. So they, again, when things are a little more normal, they're giving presentations in their communities, and they can also answer any of your questions about studying in the U.S. So if you're located in any of those cities, please feel free to reach out to them, reach out to us. We can connect you with them. And again, we've got Nastya in Vinnytsia and Masha in Cherkasy here with us today. All right, let's talk about interviews. So I think the most important thing to first understand is why universities and programs require interviews. And it's important to know that when we're speaking about interviews directly with universities, not all universities will do interviews, okay? So they will spell out the application process on their website, and they might say, if you get to a certain round in the application process, we will request an interview with you. But not always. Many universities and programs do not use an interview in their process. So if there's not an interview, don't worry. That's not a bad sign or anything. But most exchange programs, speaking about Fulbright or Flex or the Global grad program, so U.S. government exchange programs will require an interview. But in either case, whether it's with a university or with an exchange program, really their main goal is just to get to know you on a more personal level. So, when they look at your application, they see your test results, they see your transcripts, and your resume, if applicable. But, even though that gives them a lot of good information, it's even more valuable if they can actually speak with you, maybe ask you to expand on some things that they saw in your application. And it really helps them to see a different side of you. And they also want to see how well a particular student suits the university or the program. So we speak about this all the time at EducationUSA, that when you're searching for universities, you really should be looking for a good fit, right? I always like to talk about it like you're trying to find your college soulmate. You're trying to find that one college or university or program that really fits exactly what you need. And the university wants to evaluate this as well. They want to see, will the student really fit in with our community? Do they understand what we have to offer? And so that's another thing that they're looking for in the interview. And it's the same thing with an exchange program. They want to see, do you understand what you will get from this exchange program? Do you understand what the goals of this program are? And it's really helpful for them to be able to evaluate that in a conversation. But in any case, if you are invited for an interview, again, if that is part of the application process, that's a really good sign. It's not, of course, a guarantee of anything, but it means that they were impressed enough with your application that they want to hear more from you, that they want to know more about you. So anytime you get an invitation for an interview, whether it's directly from a university or from an exchange program, that's a good sign. I think this is something that's important to keep in mind when you are going in for an interview. It's important to remember that universities and exchange programs are not like trying to test you or to trick you during the interview. Like I just said, they really just want to get to know you personally, and there's not some sort of hidden agenda, right? They're not trying to trick you or make this intentionally challenging or difficult. So that can sometimes help, if you think about it really as just a conversation, a way for them to get to know you. They're not trying to test you or challenge you. Okay. So there are a couple main goals that you have during an interview, again, whether it's for a university or an exchange program. The first one is to show that you are the same person who is in the application. Again, it's not like they're trying to catch you in a lie or something, or see if you really wrote your application, but it's more just, this person who's reflected in the application, is that the same person, figuratively, that you have a conversation with. So they want to see like, oh, is this really, do they speak? Do they present themselves? Do they have a conversation? Do they think in the same way as the person that we see in the application? So again, they just want to sort of see the reality of who you are and how that maybe compares with what's reflected in the application. And that can be true where it can, like, sort of the opposite can be true. Maybe your application was pretty strong, but they maybe have some, still have some questions. Maybe you're not a particularly strong writer. So let's say maybe your essay was not very good, but they're really impressed with the rest of your application. Maybe you speak or sort of present yourself on a personal level better than you do in writing. And that allows them to see that as well. Like, maybe their essay or whatever isn't quite representative of who they really are as a person when you have a conversation. So really, again, they're just trying to see how does the person sort of also visto in real life compare with what we see in the application. And And your goal is also, of course, is to show yourself from the best side. So present yourself in the best light. Maybe that seems sort of obvious, but you really want to make sure that you are, being really honest about your accomplishments. And it can be a difficult balance. And we say this in the essay as well, and the rest of the application. It can be a difficult balance to really make sure that you are showing your best side without sort of bragging or being too full of yourself. But in an interview, really, you want to be able to really speak to the best parts of you and present those things in the best way. And a lot of interviewing is not just what you say, but how you say it. But taking your experiences to tell a story and show how those things really make you a good candidate for this program or this university. You also want to demonstrate your familiarity with the program and the university. We, again, talk about this a lot at EducationUSA. I talk about this a lot with personal statements, for statements of purpose for graduate school. You really want to show that you know the program and the university well. Show off that you've done your research, because again, that's something that they're looking for, is to say, does this student really understand what our university has to offer as compared with other universities or other programs? So you have to know where you're applying, and you really need to show that off during the interview. And of course, sort of prove or again show off your motivation. Again, even if you're a really strong writer, it can be really useful to be able to have a conversation with somebody and again sort of express why you're interested in this program, what you hope to get out of the program, what you can give to the program. So again, just sort of demonstrating in person how motivated you are for this opportunity. Because again, especially if you've been offered an interview, that's a really good sign. So they want to see, often that's sort of the last step for them to see, okay, is this person really excited for it? Are they going to take this opportunity and make the most of it? There's sort of a guideline that says, in any case, whether it's for a job interview or an interview for a university or program, the interviewer already knows everything that they need to know within 3 to 5 minutes. So if any of you know anything about psychology, you know that humans, people really form first impressions really quickly. We make judgments about people. And typically an interviewer, especially someone who has been doing this a lot and knows what they're looking for, can usually tell if you have that within 3 to 5 minutes. That doesn't mean that after 5 minutes you should just give up and say, well, this person already has made a judgment, so I shouldn't try. But really, that emphasizes that the first few minutes are really, really important in making a first impression. Okay. So there's a couple different cases in terms of who will be interviewing you. So if we're talking about directly with a university, so this is not through an exchange program, this is just for a degree program, whether it's, again, it could be a bachelor's degree. Interviews for bachelor's degrees are a little bit more rare, but it could happen. Bachelor's degree or a master's degree, which is more common, and then PhD degrees, which of course interviews for PhD candidates are very common because you're going to be working very closely with a specific professor on a specific team. Anyway, so if you have an interview directly with the university, your interviewer could be a member of the admissions committee. So this could be a director of admissions, associate director of admissions, director of international enrollment, or a professor who might also be making decisions on the admissions committee. Again, a professor depends sort of on the level. For an undergraduate program, this would probably be a little bit more rare. But for master's and PhD degrees, again, where you are going to be working more closely with faculty, this is more common. Or you may have an interview with an alumnus or an alumna of the university. And we'll talk a little bit more about these different types in just a moment. But typically when you have an interview with the university, it will usually just be one person that you're interviewing with, unless it's for a PhD program, then there might be more people involved there. If we're speaking about an exchange program, so for example, again, Flex, Global UGrad, or Fulbright, usually there will be an interview panel. So you will be speaking with multiple people, which can be intimidating, but it's actually, I think, a good thing because you have people with multiple opinions who can sort of discuss. So it's not just one person sort of deciding your fate. It's a bunch of people who can share ideas and discuss after your interview. So usually this would include a representative of the program, whatever it is. Then, for U.S. government exchange programs, there would be a representative of the U.S. Embassy there. Or the organization that's administering the program, and often there is an alumni of the program. Okay, and this is useful to get their input because they have been through the program. They know what makes a strong candidate. So again, it's always helpful to have that input. So again, just to emphasize, for an exchange program, you will usually have multiple people interviewing you from these sort of different aspects of the process. But in any case, your interviewers, whoever it is, have already, become familiar with your application. So it's important to know that they would never, put someone up there who doesn't know anything about you. Like this person, whoever it is, or people have already looked through your application, they've read your resume, they've read your essay. So they are already familiar with who you are. So they're not just putting someone in there blind. Okay, if we're speaking about interviews directly with universities, so again, not exchange programs, there are a couple different kinds of interviews, and I already mentioned these just a moment ago. So one would be an admissions officer interview. So this is someone with the admissions committee. Again, that could be director of admissions, assistant director of admissions, or even a professor, because often professors help make those admissions decisions. And again, they're really just trying to get to know you, and might ask some additional questions about your application. Sometimes, especially if it's with a professor, they might just want to see how you think. So it sort of depends on your field of study, but they might not only ask you questions about your application, but also about, for example, for an international affairs program, they might ask you about, what are some of your thoughts about this recent development in the international community or something like that. So they want to see how you think and how you approach problems. So that can be some kind of information that a professor would want to get as well. You may have an alumni interview, which again offers a unique perspective because the alumni has lived the experience of that university. And again, they have a pretty good sense of, is the student someone who would fit in with this community or not? Typically, alumni interviews are a little bit more informal, of course, because you're speaking with someone who is probably a more recent alumna or alumnus, so they're a little bit more younger, closer to your age. But do remember that even though it's more informal, they're still evaluating you, okay? There may be an automatic interview, and this is when you actually do the interview, or I should say any of these, admissions officer, alumni interviews, of course, especially nowadays, most of those take place online, unless you have the opportunity to be there in person, which we'll talk about in a moment. But automatic interviews take place completely online, and you do not have another person to speak with. So usually the way this works is you log onto a special platform. They've sent you a link ahead of time. Questions will pop up on the screen. You'll maybe have 30 seconds to think about your response, or maybe less, and then you'll have a certain amount of time to give your response, maybe 30 seconds or 60 seconds, and it records you. These are typically, I've seen these used for MPA programs, Masters of Public Administration programs. So again, this is usually less asking you about your application because, it's more useful for someone to be able to have a conversation with you and ask you follow-up questions. But instead here, it's more about, thinking about policy or seeing how you think, seeing your critical thinking skills, your reasoning skills, and sort of being able to come up with a stance or an argument and be able to synthesize it really quick in 60 or 30 or 60 seconds. So that's a kind of interview that you may see as well. And then an on-campus interview, again, especially for international students, universities do not expect you to come in person to campus. The case where this would be most likely would be, again, for a PhD program where it's sort of a bit of a more weighty decision and they want to be able to see you in person. It gives you a chance to see the campus and, again, meet with faculty who you would be working with. And again, if that's the case, if they wanted to require you to come to campus for an interview, very often universities will reimburse you for that, or at least cover part of the costs. But again, if it's absolutely impossible, they would make it work online. Okay. In any case, whether it's for an exchange program or directly with a university, they usually will send you an email when they invite you for the interview and give you some information about what to expect. Some universities even write blog posts or have articles on their website telling exactly how to prepare for the interview. So like I mentioned at the beginning, in any case, these admissions committees or exchange program committees are not trying to trick you or surprise you. Like they it's not like they tell you a list of 10 questions that they're going to ask you, but they do tell you what to prepare, what to think about. So again, they're not trying to trick you. They want you to be prepared and do your best as well. This is the typical structure for any interview, again, whether it's for a university or an exchange program. So of course, there is the introductory part where if it's taking place online, as most do nowadays, where you log on to Skype or whatever it is, the interviewers introduce themselves and usually tell you a few words about the format of the interview. It's important to know that the interview really starts from the very first moment when you log into Skype, okay? Your body language is really important from the first moment you log on before you even said anything, If you're doing it online, there's a big difference in the way your body language is, right? Are you sitting up straight in your chair? Do you look attentive? Or are you sitting back like this, looking kind of bored, right? Like it's very important to think about that, exactly how they will see you from the very first moment. And then after that, the main part starts when they start asking you questions. So I would say in 90% of interviews, the first question they're going to ask you is, tell us about yourself. And they usually don't give you more instructions than that. They really want to ask you about, what do you think? Basically, with that question or with that statement, they're saying, tell us what you think is important for us to know about you. And it's important to think about this ahead of time. We'll talk about that in a moment when we talk about what to prepare. But think about this ahead of time so you don't, this is not your opportunity to tell a 15-minute explanation of your whole life story. They're really just asking for the most important parts about you that are relevant to this program or this university. Okay, but almost 100% of the time, that will be the first thing that they will ask you. Again, hopefully when they invite you for an interview, they will give you some more details about other things they will ask you about so that you sort of have an idea of what they want to know during the interview. This part of the interview could be 5 minutes or it could be 50 minutes, okay? Students often worry that the length of the interview is after the fact, after the interview has happened, they worry that the length of the interview is some indication of how well it went or how well it didn't go. And really don't try to read anything into that, okay? It could be that they just had a couple final remaining questions before they made their choice and they found out everything they needed to know in 5 minutes to accept you. Or maybe they, oops, sorry, there's a mistake on that slide. Or maybe they, really had more in-depth things they needed to ask you and they really enjoyed having conversation with you. And so they wanted to talk for 50 minutes. Okay, so it does not matter the length of the interview, and don't try to sort of read too much into that. And then, of course, there will be the conclusion of the interview, where they give you the chance to ask any questions that you have, and then they will usually tell you about next steps. They will say, you know, this is when you can expect to hear from us, or this is what else we need from you. So again, that'll be the ending of the interview, and then you'll say goodbye. I didn't put this, I don't think, anywhere else in the presentation. Let's see. But after the ending of the interview, and whether this is for a job interview or a university interview or an exchange program interview, any interview, it's always a good idea to send a thank you email after the interview. And the general rule is within 24 hours, just to say, you know, thank you so much for taking the time to interview me. I really enjoyed our conversation. Maybe highlight some important parts of the interview, you know, say, I really enjoyed speaking with you about whatever, or I really enjoyed learning more about the universities, blah, blah, blah. So to kind of keep those little points fresh in their minds as they're making their decision. And then also to say, you know, if you need any more information, please feel free to reach out. But that goes a long way. It looks really professional. And again, shows your gratitude, you know, that they took the time to interview you. So that's always a good idea to do that within 24 hours of the end of the interview. So how can you prepare for an interview? The first thing is that preparing is obligatory. You must prepare. You should think about this, you know, like any official interview that you would have for a job or anything else. Please prepare for your interview. I mentioned this already, but your interview really begins from that first moment when they invite you for an interview. So they will start sort of making a judgment about you based on how you respond to them, to the invitation for an interview. They will judge your professionalism and your emails and everything like that, and also your timeliness, right? If they invite you for an interview and you don't respond for 2 weeks, that's not a good sign, right? So really think about the fact that they are starting to form an impression of you the moment that they ask you for an interview or invite you for an interview, okay? One thing that you should definitely do is, again, go through the information on their website, sort of refamiliarize yourself with the main features of the program or aspects of the program. Look for maybe keywords or phrases that they use a lot, that you see them using a lot in their program description or something like that. Maybe, you know, make a note for yourself to bring that up, because if it's something that they're mentioning multiple times, it means that it's something important to them. So sort of if you can use the language that they use during your interview, that can help you. Check all of your technology, please. Like if you have, we're speaking about online interviews, of course, if you have a friend who can help you out, and hop onto Skype and check everything with you, your microphone, please do that, because there's nothing more awkward than, you know, being like, oh, we can't hear you, or your video's frozen, or anything like that during the interview, okay? This is super important. Find a quiet place that has no distractions. You know, make sure that no one's going to be walking behind you, or your babushka is going to be calling in from the other room. So make sure that there are no distractions. You know, avoid doing it in a cafe or something where waiters are walking by or people are talking to each other, music is playing. Like, that's just a bad idea. And find, you know, have a neutral background behind you. That does not mean that you need to be in front of a white wall, but, you know, if you are doing it in your apartment and there's a huge mess behind you, you know, piles of clothes on the floor, or really strange background decorations, you know, people are going to, whether it's fair or not, people are going to make a judgment about you. I have actually been on the other side. I have been an interviewer, and you know, I have had instances where we didn't offer somebody a position or offer someone an opportunity because they were not in a good place for the interview, even though their responses were really great. You know, they were outside on a bench and there were cars going by and you heard sirens and it was hard to hear them and it was windy. And it's like, even though they gave really good responses, it seemed unprofessional. I was like, well, this is a really important interview and they didn't even take the time to find a good, quiet place for this. Like, how seriously can they be about this, or how much can they really want this opportunity? So interviewers really do make judgments about that, okay? It's a good idea to have a little notepad or something next to you, especially if it's online, with a couple notes to yourself, just to, again, remind you of some things that you wanted to talk about or some questions that you had. If you're going in person, that might be a little bit more odd, just make sure that you're not like looking at your notepad all the time, but especially to write down the questions that you want to ask, that's completely normal. And if you're going, I guess I'll get to that in a moment. If you're going in person, it's always a good idea to bring a couple copies of your resume with you, again, if that's relevant. So if you have work experience, if you're applying for a master's or a PhD program, or an exchange program, it's always a good idea to bring that with you. If you're doing it online, it can be helpful to send that just a few minutes beforehand. If you're doing it on Skype, send the file on Skype and just say, as a reminder, again, the interviewer has seen your resume, but in case they want to reference it or want to remind themselves of something, it can be helpful for them to have it just in case. Again, only if this is relevant. So for a bachelor's program, they will not expect you to have a resume, probably. If you're interviewing, especially with a professor, usually this is the case that I think of, it can be really helpful to research the interviewer ahead of time. So of course, if it's with for a PhD program and this is a professor that you want to work with, you should already have been doing research on that professor for a long time. But sometimes, if it's for a master's program, even a bachelor's program, and if it's a professor that you had not heard about, just look up a little bit about their research. Maybe you can read something that they've written lately in case they want to talk to you about that, or you can bring up, important things that they have been writing about lately, in case they ask you about it. Okay, so it's just a good idea to know who you're interviewing with. Okay, that doesn't mean that you need to, sit on the computer for 3 hours doing a deep dive and trying to get background checks done on them, but just try to get to know something about them so you know who exactly you're going to be sitting across from, and it will make you feel a little bit better as well. Okay. I mentioned it can be useful to have a little notebook next to you to remind you of some things that you want to talk about. So these are some things that I would recommend. Again, a couple important points that talk about who you are. This will be really good for that first question. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Again, just the most important points that are relevant to this program. So again, you don't need to tell them about all the experiences you had when you were 7 years old, unless that's relevant, but really just tell them, sort of where you came from, what you're doing now, how that has, generated interest in the things that you're interested in now. So just a couple important points highlighting the most important things about you. A couple points about your goals for the program, again, showing off that you are familiar with the program and what they're looking for in candidates. And again, with this next point, a couple points about why this program really suits you the best and why you are a really good fit for this program as well. So again, looking for that mutual match about why this will be a good opportunity for both parties. And then 3 to 5 questions that you want to ask at the end of the interview. I say 3 to 5 because at the end of the interview, you want to make sure that you have at least one question. Like, it's not sort of a guarantee that the interview will be ruined if they say, do you have any questions? And you say no. But if you do have some questions, it shows that you have spent some time thinking about this. And I don't know, it seems like you're taking a more active role. When you just say, no, I don't have any questions, it seems more passive, right? So I say 3 to 5 just in case that they answer some of your questions during the interview. You still want to have 1 or 2 left at the end. And then at the end, when they say, do you have any questions? It's usually a good idea to ask just 1 or 2 because they usually have their interviews very tightly scheduled. So, sort of at the natural, logical conclusion of the interview, they probably don't want the interview to go on for another 20 minutes answering all of your questions. Okay, so just pick 1 or 2 that you really want to know the answer to. And make sure that you do not ask about something that you can easily find on their website. Okay, so really, again, ask good questions that you couldn't have found out from another source because the questions that you ask also show, your thoughtfulness and how much research you've done as well. Okay. Here's an example of an email. Sorry, I've got a little emoji over there. So here, this is just an example of what something might look like, an email might look like when someone invites you. So thank you for your application to the University of Oklahoma. We reviewed your application, would like to invite you for an interview. And then they have all the details about the time and the date and things to prepare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then sincerely, Dr. Greg Jones. This is not a response that you should send, right? Maybe it seems obvious to you, but we see responses like this more than you would think, okay? So this is unprofessional. Their Skype name is not professional. Please, please, please get an email address and a Skype name that is your first name and your last name, okay? We see so many bizarre cases of people having, their phone number in their email address. So it's like 9 numbers and then their first name, or just emails they created when they were 14 years old. Like, please get a professional email address so they know who they are talking to, and a professional Skype name so they can find you easily as well. So it's just really important, and because when your email address or name pops in their inbox, they know exactly who it is, right? If it's Bella Beauty 45, they don't know who that is, okay? So please, please, I'm begging you, get yourself a professional email address and Skype name. And no emojis, please. Even if you are very excited, keep it professional, because like I said, they're making a judgment about you from the first moment. This would be much better. Make sure that you have a proper greeting, a proper salutation. Address them the way that they have addressed themselves. So, if they had said sincerely, Greg, they signed it that way, you could still write here sincere or dear Greg if you didn't know if they're a doctor or a Mr. or whatever. But seeing here that they put their full name with the dot in front of it, you should make sure that you use the same form of address. Okay. Thank them for the opportunity, keep it professional, no emojis, right? They have a proper Skype name, and then make sure that you have a proper salutation, right? This person did not have any dear or sincerely. This is super, super important to these things, okay? If you ever have any questions about how to formulate emails, you can always ask us at EduUSA. We can review your emails and sort of give you the green light, the thumbs up before you send it if you ever have any questions about that. But be professional. And just some general advice. This is something you can practice with friends ahead of time or family. Make sure that you are answering their questions directly, but make sure that you give enough information. So make sure your responses are not too short. If they ask you a yes or no question, which is kind of odd, usually they'll give you more open-ended questions that give room for discussion. But if they ask you a yes or no question and you just say yes or no, and that's it, usually they want a little bit more of an explanation. But again, you should not go on for 3 to 5 minutes about, some long history to the question. Okay, so just answer the question directly, but make sure you give enough information. I would say 30 seconds to a minute is normal for a usual interview question in terms of the response. Make sure you arrive early before the interview. This includes, this goes for both in-person interviews and online interviews. If it's in person, go ahead of time, find this place ahead of time, using public transportation or whatever else you need. So make sure that you think about that and practice ahead of time to see how long it's going to take you. Because I can say from my personal experience, Google Maps might tell me it's going to take 20 minutes to get there. But there is, traffic on Saxahansko, and it took me 45 minutes to get there. Okay, so make sure that you check this ahead of time, and especially if you're going into some facilities, like if your interview were at the embassy or something, you have to think about the fact that it might take you 15 minutes to get through security and find out where you're going. Okay, so just arrive early, test it out ahead of time, make sure you know where you're going. Usually 5 minutes is a good time to arrive in person, okay? And if you're online, it's the same thing. Just log on to Skype, tell the person that you're ready, be there right when your interview is supposed to start. Even if your interviewer is not ready, that's okay. It shows that you're ready. and make sure that you start on time right away, because that says a lot about your professionalism. For online interviews, whenever possible, please do not use your telephone. There are just so many things that can go wrong, and when you have to hold it and it's shaking around, and just please try to avoid that whenever possible. If you absolutely cannot avoid using your telephone, I'm speaking about for Skype calls or something like that, right? If there are video calls where they need to see you. If you're just talking on the phone, like obviously that would be okay. But if they need to see you, try to avoid using your phone. And if you do need to use your phone, it's not a bad idea to send your interviewer a note ahead of time and say, dear so-and-so, I'm looking forward to our interview. I just wanted to let you know that due to some circumstances or whatever, I need to use my phone for the interview, my cell phone. So I'm sorry if the quality is not great or something like that. So just to let them know that you've thought about this ahead of time, and let them know what to expect, okay? Make sure that you respond to the questions that they ask. So that's another thing, don't sort of go in with these main ideas about what you want to tell them and then just ignore their questions, right? So that's kind of the most frustrating thing. We've all seen that, on media interviews, right? Sort of on news shows when, for example, politicians absolutely do not answer the question that they are being asked, okay? And interviewers feel the same frustration, like answer the question that they are asking, again, directly, not too long, not too short. And if you don't understand something that they say, that's totally fine. Just ask them to repeat it, again, politely. Say, could you repeat that? Or could you explain that in a different way? Or I didn't understand what the question was. Just ask them. That's totally fine. And of course, the most important thing is to be yourself. So interviews can be really stressful. The more you do, the better that you will get at them. But the most important thing is to be yourself, because that's what they want to see. They want to see who you are as a person. So don't try to predict what they want to see, or don't try to fit into this mold that you think that they are looking for. Just be yourself, and that's what they want to see. And just a few more words before I turn it over to our lovely ambassadors. I didn't put this anywhere on the slide, but along with your appearance, make sure that you dress professionally, okay? Again, they're probably not expecting a tuxedo, but make sure that you dress nice, and just make sure it's professional. Your clothes are clean. If it's in person and you're coming in from outside, give yourself a couple minutes to run to the restroom, make sure your hair is looking okay or whatever. So your appearance is really important. And even for Skype interviews, we see people making a lot of jokes about this online these days with everyone working from home. But even if they're only going to see your top half, make sure that you have appropriate, pants on as well, because who knows, maybe someone would come into your room and you'd have to stand up. So just make sure that from head to toe you look professional. Okay, so business casual or professional clothes. And I think this is good advice. I always used to tell this. I used to work in theater, and I would always tell this to actors who would go in for auditions, but it goes for job interviews and university interviews as well. But remember that your interviewers are hoping that you are going to be the person they're looking for. So again, they are not trying to trick you. They do not want to see you fail. They're not trying to surprise you. They really hope that when you walk into that room or log onto Skype, that you are going to be exactly that person where they say, oh my gosh, this person will be perfect for our program or perfect for our university. Okay, so basically they want you to be successful. So try to keep that in mind, that they're not trying to challenge you. They really hope that you're going to be what they're looking for. Okay. So just keep calm, nail that interview, take a couple deep breaths before you go in. If you need to take a couple deep breaths during the interview, that's fine, but just be calm. Sometimes you got to slow down, think for a minute, and your interviewers totally understand that. They themselves have been interviewed, and so they understand that this can be a really nerve-wracking process, okay? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our lovely alumni. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Masha, Nastya, do you have a preference for who will speak first?
Yeah, we already talked with Nastya and we decided that I would like to be the first.
Great.
Okay, so I will start with my situation. I am a global U grad participant and I also had an interview. And I remember this time when the person from embassy called me and invited me for the interview, and it was really very important to be very patient and to be very polite while talking to them. So the first thing, when you got an invitation from the interview, do not, either it is on phone or email, try to be calm and try to be very, very polite. Do not shout like, hooray, I was waiting for that, or oh my god, I'm crying, or something like that. Like, do not be like that. Just thank people for the opportunity and just write down all the information that is given to you. Also, if you answer the email, as Nell already said, it is very important to write greetings and to write who are you at the end of the email, because it is also very important to know that it can be 100 people with your names, like Vanya, Masha, Ola, and when you answer, it is sometimes very difficult to find who is this Ola, who is this Vanya. Okay, the first tip that I would like to give to everybody, like, take care about your appearance. Like, as many people say, the first image of ourselves we have from our appearance. So how you look, it tells a lot about yourself. You should look I think you should wear business casual clothes. You should try to make sure that you look nice and modest. Do not try to be like very cool or to be rude and to show that you are the best. Do not do like that. Like, be modest and be honest. The next tip that I would like to give is to make sure that you come in time, because being late is the first step to failure. So if you're in time, if you come like 5 minutes before interview or 10 minutes before interview, it is very good. Especially if it is winter, you must come 5 minutes or 10 minutes before the interview, because you must make your hands being hot, because while giving a handshaking with people, it is not very good to give a cold hand for handshaking. Okay, so the next tip, if you have an online interview, make sure that there is silence in your room, that nobody will come to your room and shout, or there will be noise. Also make sure that you have a wall besides you, not different like paintings or mess or something like that, or some people partying behind you. No, you should be alone, and it must be really clean room or just a wall behind you. Also, when I was preparing for my interview, I tried to find some people who were already on my program, and I asked them what questions could be asked on the interview. And when I got these questions, I wrote them in my notebook, and I tried to think about answers that I could give for them. So if you know that you're applying to the university or to the exchange program, and you know, for example, that this exchange program is connected with culture exchange, or for example, education in America, you should know that probably people will ask you about how you will introduce your culture. How will you introduce your culture, or how this program will have an effect on your life. So you should think about answers before the interview. So when you will go to the interview, you will make sure that you know what to say. Also, make sure to be specific and provide examples from your life. As much specific you are, the better for you. If you have an online interview, take care about your background, as I said, and try to have a room in a silence, so a silent room. make sure that you're positive. Do not say about like that there is a war in Ukraine, there are something bad in our university. Do not try to be over emotional, like do not say about how you were crying for this or how you were happy to get this invitation, because nobody needs your emotions. People need to know how psychology, like how you're prepared for this program, and if you are talking about how much you cried or how much you were nervous, it is not good for you. Do not wear a lot of jewelry because when you have an interview and you move with your hands, your jewelry make noise, and sometimes it can be, you cannot be hurt because of your jewelry. And as I said already, do not be nervous. Like try to prepare, try to get to know what questions you will have, try to think about answers that you might give, and if you will know beforehand what you will answer, it will be easier for you during an interview, even if you will get some unknown question. I think that is what I can say. Nelly, I didn't hear you.
Sorry. You'd think after a month of working at home, I would know how to work my microphone. That's wonderful advice. Thank you, Masha. Nastya, what do you think?
Well, I agree with the advice that Masha has given, and I also like to share a little bit of my experience. So as you know, as some of you might know, I've applied to bachelor's programs, so I have not done much interviewing in my life before that. So I was pretty nervous, and as you might guess, I searched all over the internet to find out what are the possible questions so that I could prepare myself better for it. And also one thing that I found particularly helpful was doing practice interviews with my friends or with my teacher. Because personally, when I'm nervous, I start talking too fast, and that's something that stops people from understanding me fully. So that's something that I worked on.
Nastya's frozen. Let's see if she comes back.
Something went wrong here. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so what I was saying is that I would like to emphasize that you need to make sure that your technology works all right, because when I was at my interview with college alumni, my Skype kept muting my interviewers, so all the time I could not hear either the beginning or the end of the question, and that made me super nervous. So make sure your Skype is all right, and probably talk to some IT people to ensure.
Nastya, come back. Okay. All right. Nastya will come back when she can. While she's figuring out her technology, I see we have a couple questions that I would like to answer. So anyone watching us live, if you have questions, please type them into the chat box on YouTube and we will answer them. I see someone's asking what to do if you don't know the answer to the question. Nastya, you're back. Thank you so much. I'm glad you're back. We're turning to some questions, and I hope you'll be able to fit in the rest of your advice in the questions. What should you do if you don't know the answer to a question? Have either of you had that experience during an interview?
Yes, I actually had such an experience where when I'm asked a question and I literally have no idea what to answer. And I think that first off, you'd want to say a sentence or two introducing the topic, as that will give you some time to think over the question. And actually, I would say that saying, I'm sorry, could I have a moment to think about this question is all right too, rather than talking some nonsense in order to give yourself time to prepare. So yeah, I would want to have some time to think over the question, say something, rather than ignoring the question completely.
Yeah. And I would say, again, it depends on the interview, but most of the time they will be asking you about yourself and your own experiences, right? So again, they're not necessarily trying to test your knowledge or trick you in some way, but if it is for a specific field of study and they ask you some topical question about, I don't know, again, for international relations, like the latest conflict between China and Iran, and you just don't know the answer, I would say it's always better to be honest than to try to make something up if it's a knowledge-based question. Just be really honest and say, I hadn't heard about that. Can you give me some background on that topic or something? So maybe demonstrate, that you still have some critical thinking skills, but if it's a topic-based question and you really don't have any knowledge on that topic, I would say it's better just to admit that than to try to make something up. But that's great advice, Nastya, to ask for a moment to think about it. Give yourself a moment to think about it. That's completely normal. Let's see. Can you provide an example of such a question that you had no idea how to answer, Nastya? Do you remember what that question was?
I remember it was something about a book, but this interview was a couple of months ago, so I don't really remember everything about it. And to be honest, I was so nervous, I might have forgotten the whole thing completely. But it was something regarding a book. Like,
yeah.
Okay, I can't remember it.
That's okay. Sorry. All right. Masha, maybe you can mention, do you remember some of the questions that you were asked during your interview, just to give people an idea of the kinds of questions that interviewers ask?
The first question was, why do I apply for the Global Grad program? Also, it can be asked in the university, like, why do you apply for our university, or why do you apply for our program? How will I introduce Ukrainian culture in America? What kind of volunteering I'm doing here in Ukraine? I told that I would love to cook the borscht, and then they asked me how would I react if I will cook a borscht, and my American friends and group mates will say that my borscht is not tasty, and what I will do. Yes, it was kind of difficult question, but I answered it. And what else? Like, what is your favorite book? It can be very sudden questions. Why do you apply? For example, I don't know, what classes would you like to take in the United States? And something like that. Like, it's too difficult to say all the questions.
That helps. Nastya, what about you? Some questions that you were asked during interviews?
Well, now that I thought of, I remember the question that I was asked during my Flex interview, and it was, imagine your host grandma has bought or has knitted you a sweater, which you totally dislike. While she asked you to wear it to school, what would you do? That was a question that made me stumble and think about it for a while. But I think I managed to answer to the best of my knowledge.
Awesome. Okay. We keep losing Nastya. But let's do a last call for questions. For those of you who are watching us live, last call for questions, please type them into the chat box. I see one more. Can you narrow the definition of a professional outfit? So I would say for men, probably a suit, a button-down shirt, and maybe a tie. A suit might be a little bit formal, but still I would always err on the side of being too professional rather than being not professional enough. And then for women, again, business casual, anything you would wear in an office, you know, a nice shirt, nice pants, not jeans, a dress or a skirt if you're comfortable with that. But exactly as Masha mentioned, you said, don't go over the top, okay? You don't need to go to the, you can if you want to, but you don't need to go to the salon, get your hair done for 3 hours, put on your prom dress or anything like that. Like just professional, try to look normal, try to look like yourself, okay? All right. Masha, someone in this chat wants to know what you answered to the question about borscht. What was your response?
Can it be a secret?
Yes, you don't have to share if you don't want to.
Secret.
Okay. All right, so I think we've hit just about our hour mark. I hope that this has been helpful for those watching online. Thank you all for joining us. Maybe to wrap up, Nastya and Masha, can you give like your one main piece of advice that you would give to someone who's preparing for an interview? The most important thing.
Be yourself and be honest. Be yourself and be honest. Yes, this is the main thing.
Great. Nastya?
Follow Maria's advice, and also another one would be research your program or university. One more time, make sure that you know 100% what you're applying for and what they offer and what you can offer.
Amazing. Wonderful. Thank you both so much for joining us. Thank you everyone for joining us online. This will be available on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to watch this again if you want to review any of the information. If you have any questions, please reach out to us at EducationUSA. You can find us on our website, sign up for a consultation. We can connect you with our lovely ambassadors if you have any follow-up questions. So if you have any questions about higher education in the US, будь ласка, звертайтеся. Thank you so much, ladies. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and bye-bye, everybody.